The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Jefferson County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floor as Judge Patricia Hernandez reviewed the case file that had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. In 23 years on the bench, she had presided over thousands of cases, murders, robberies, drug trafficking rings, and countless custody disputes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for Rodriguez v. State of Texas. Case number 2024 CB-8847. The file was unusually thick for a custody case, bulging with psychiatric evaluations, medical records, and social worker reports. At the center of it all was a single photograph paperclip to the front cover. 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez, her dark eyes staring directly at the camera with an expression that seemed far too old for her. Cherubic face, those eyes haunted Judge Hernandez. They held a depth of trauma that no child should ever carry, a silence that spoke louder than any testimony could. Emma hadn't spoken a single word in 8 months, and 13 days now since the night of October 15th, when her world exploded in a chaos of flashing lights, shouting voices, and the metallic click of handcuffs. The police report from that night read like a nightmare. Officers had stormed the modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street at 11:47 p.m., executing a search warrant based on months of surveillance. What they found inside would later be described as one of the most sophisticated drug operations Jefferson County had ever uncovered. But hidden among the seized evidence, the bagged narcotics, and the arrested suspects was a terrified little girl who would never be the same. The courtroom was already filling with the usual cast of characters that surrounded high-profile custody cases. Social workers shuffled through their files, court reporters tested their machines, and attorneys whispered urgently with their clients. But all eyes kept drifting to the back corner, where Emma sat with her court-appointed guardian. Linda Thompson, the veteran foster mother, had cared for over 200 children during her 15-year career. But Emma was different. Emma was the child who made her question whether some wounds could ever truly heal. At the plaintiff's table sat Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, 34, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. His dress uniform hung in his apartment closet, adorned with ribbons and medals earned during 3 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and commendations for valor that meant nothing in this sterile courtroom where his fitness as a father was being questioned. Marcus had returned from his final deployment 6 months ago to find his daughter in state custody, and his ex-wife, Carmen, facing federal drug trafficking charges. The irony was bitter. While Marcus had been fighting for freedom overseas, his own daughter had become a prisoner of trauma in her own home. Carmen Rodriguez had been his high school sweetheart, the girl who had promised to wait for him through deployments, who had sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and letters sprayed with her perfume. But 3 deployments and years of loneliness had changed her. The woman who had once dreamed of being a teacher had instead become entangled with dealers, who saw her military housing as the perfect cover for their operations. By the time Marcus realized what was happening, it was too late. Carmen was facing 25 years in federal prison, and Emma was lost in a system that seemed determined to keep her away from the only family she had left. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the state's child psychologist, had submitted a devastating report. Emma exhibited signs of severe PTSD, selective mutism, and attachment disorder. She suffered from night terrors, refused to sleep alone, and would become catatonic when faced with loud noises or sudden movements. The recommendation was clear. Emma needed intensive, long-term therapeutic intervention in a stable environment, and Marcus Rodriguez, despite his military service and clean record, was deemed an unfit guardian due to his extended absences and inability to provide consistent care. The defense table held Marcus's attorney, Sarah Beth Williams, a former military liar who had taken the case pro bono. After reading about it in the local newspaper, she had built her civilian practice defending veterans, understanding the unique challenges they faced when transitioning back to civilian life. But this case was different. This wasn't about helping a soldier adjust to peace. This was about reuniting a father with a daughter who might never recover from what she had witnessed. Judge Hernandez looked up from the file as the bailiff called the court to order. The gallery was packed with reporters, social workers, and community members who had followed the case through months of preliminary hearings. Everyone knew this was more than just another custody dispute. It was a test of whether the system could truly act in a child's best interest. When that interest conflicted with its own procedures and protocols, As the proceedings began, Judge Hernandez couldn't shake the feeling that this case would define her career and, more importantly, it would determine whether a traumatized little girl would ever have the chance to heal. The morning's testimony would focus on psychiatric evaluations and social worker recommendations, but everyone in the courtroom knew that the real decision lay with a 3-year-old who hadn't spoken in 8 months. What none of them could have predicted was that before the day was over, everything would change. In a few hours, an unexpected witness would walk through those courtroom doors, carrying with him the key to unlocking Emma's silence and revealing a truth that would transform not just this case, but the entire way Jefferson County approached child trauma. The impossible was about to become possible, but first, they all had to sit through the methodical presentation of evidence that painted Marcus Rodriguez as an unfit father and Emma as a permanently damaged child. Judge Hernandez gavelled the session to order, unaware that she was about to witness one of the most extraordinary moments in legal history. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B creaked open, with a sound that seemed to echo through the tense atmosphere like thunder. Every head turned as Detective Sarah Chen stepped through the threshold, her polished badge catching the morning light, streaming through the tall windows. But it wasn't the detective who commanded the room's attention, it was her partner walking silently beside her. Rex was magnificent in the way that only a perfectly trained German Shepherd could be, standing 26 inches at the shoulder and weighing 85 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, yet his dark eyes held the disciplined focus of a seasoned professional. His black and tan coat was immaculate, brushed to perfection for his court appearance, and the specialized K9 harness across his chest bore the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department insignia with pride. The transformation in the courtroom was immediate and palpable. Conversations died mid-sentence, papers stopped rustling, and even the court reporter's fingers paused above her keys. Rex wasn't just any police dog, he was a legend in Jefferson County law enforcement. A 4-year-old German Shepherd whose nose had led to more drug convictions than any other K9 in the state's history. Detective Chen had been Rex's handler for 3 years, ever since she transferred from the Austin Police Department. Following a commendation for her work in narcotics, she was 32 years old, with the sharp eyes and steady demeanor of someone who had seen too much but still believed in justice. Her partnership with Rex had been forged in the crucible of dangerous operations, late-night stakeouts, and the shared understanding that comes only between the professionals who trust each other with their lives. Rex had been born in Germany and imported as a puppy specifically for police work, his bloodline traced back to champions, dogs who had served with distinction in law enforcement agencies across Europe. But Rex was special even among the elite. His trainer, Klaus Brennan, had described him as Amleg, unique, a dog whose intelligence seemed almost supernatural. Rex could detect drugs hidden in places that would stump seasoned detectives, and his success rate in court testimony was unprecedented. 347 cases, 347 convictions. As Chen and Rex made their way toward the witness stand, attorneys on both sides shuffled through their notes with renewed urgency. Rex's presence meant the state was bringing out their most powerful weapon, the evidence that had started this entire legal battle. 8 months ago, it had been Rex's nose that had led officers through the Rodriguez home, systematically identifying every hiding place where Carmen Rodriguez and her associates had stashed their narcotics. The drug operation they had uncovered was staggering in its scope and sophistication. Carmen Rodriguez hadn't been just a user or small-time dealer, she had been a critical link in a distribution network that stretched from the Mexican border to cities across 3 states. Using her military housing as a cover, she had helped move over $2 million worth of cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl through Jefferson County. The bust had made national news, with Rex's photograph appearing on the front page of the Houston Chronicle, alongside the headline, "Wonder Dog Busts $1 million Drug Ring." But what the newspapers hadn't reported, what even the official police reports had glossed over, was the strange behavior Rex had exhibited that night. Detective Chen remembered it vividly, how Rex had completed his drug sweep with his usual precision, but then had refused to leave one particular room. Even after all contraband had been collected and cataloged, Rex had remained planted outside a bedroom door, whining softly in a way Chen had never heard before. That bedroom had belonged to Emma Rodriguez. Judge Hernandez watched as Detective Chen placed her right hand on the Bible, her left hand resting gently on Rex's head, a gesture that spoke to the partnership between them. Rex sat at perfect attention, his ears alert, his eyes scanning the courtroom with the focused intensity that had made him famous. But there was something else in his demeanor today, something Chen couldn't quite identify. He seemed almost restless. "Detective Chen," began Prosecutor Jeanne Mills, "please state your credentials for the court." Chen's voice was clear and professional as she recounted her 12 years in law enforcement, her specialized training in narcotics investigation, and her 3-year partnership with Rex. She explained Rex's training regimen: 2 years in Germany, learning basic obedience and scent detection, followed by 6 months of specialized narcotics training in Colorado, and ongoing monthly recertification exercises that maintained his skills at peak performance. Rex has been instrumental in over 300 drug-related arrests, Chen testified. His accuracy rate in detecting hidden narcotics is 99.7%, and his evidence has never been successfully challenged in court. As Chen spoke, Rex remained motionless except for his eyes, which seemed to be systematically studying every person in the courtroom. His gaze lingered on the attorneys, swept across the gallery of observers, and then stopped. Something had caught his attention in the back corner where Emma sat with her foster mother. Linda Thompson noticed it to the way Rex's ears perked up slightly, the subtle shift in his posture. She had fostered enough children to recognize when something significant was happening, even if she couldn't quite understand what it was. Emma, who had been staring blankly at her hands, slowly lifted her head. For the first time in months, she was looking directly at someone with what could only be described as recognition. "Detective Chen," continued Prosecutor Mills, "on the night of October 15th, 2023, did you and Rex execute a search warrant at 847 Elm Street?" "Yes, we did." "And what did Rex discover during that search?" Chen consulted her notes. Though she hardly needed them, that night was burned into her memory with crystal clarity. Rex alerted to 14 separate locations within the residence where narcotics were concealed. "We recovered 3.7 kilograms of cocaine, 1.2 kilograms of heroin, 847 fentanyl pills, and approximately $127,000 in cash." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pencils as reporters scribbled notes. This was the evidence that had sent Carmen Rodriguez to federal prison and placed Emma in protective custody. But Chen knew there was more to the story, details that hadn't made it into the official reports, observations that seemed too subjective for police documentation. Rex had found something else that night, something that couldn't be measured in kilograms or counted in currency. He had found a terrified little girl, and somehow, in ways that Chen was only beginning to understand, that discovery had changed him as much as it had changed Emma. As Chen continued her testimony, describing the methodical search that had dismantled one of the county's largest drug operations, neither she nor anyone else in the courtroom could have predicted what was about to happen. The professional distance between law enforcement officer and victim was about to collapse, revealing a connection that would challenge everything they thought they knew about justice, healing, and the unexpected ways that hope can manifest in the darkest of circumstances. Rex's testimony was about to begin, and with it, the truth about what really happened that night on Elm Street. In the back corner of courtroom 3B, 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat perfectly still, her small body dwarfed by the adult-sized chair, her legs dangling inches above the polished floor. To the casual observer, she appeared to be just another quiet toddler, perhaps overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere of the courthouse. But Linda Thompson knew better. In her 15 years as a foster mother, she had cared for 247 children, each carrying their own invisible wounds. But Emma was different. Emma was the child who made seasoned therapists question their methods and hardened social workers weep in their cars after visits. The silence that surrounded Emma wasn't the comfortable quiet of a shy child. It was the devastating silence of trauma so profound it had stolen her voice entirely. 8 months and 13 days had passed since Emma had spoken her last words. A cheerful "Good morning, Mama," called out on what would become the worst night of her young life. Since then, nothing. Not a word, not a cry, not even a whisper in her sleep. Linda adjusted Emma's small pink dress, the one she'd bought, hoping it might spark some joy. In the child's hollow eyes, Emma's dark hair was braided with care, adorned with tiny butterfly clips that Linda had found in the discount bin at the local pharmacy. The foster mother had learned that Emma loved butterflies, though the child had never told her so directly. Instead, Emma would stop and stare whenever they passed the children's book section with its colorful displays, her gaze lingering on images of monarchs and swallowtails with something that almost resembled wonder. The transformation in Emma since that October night was heartbreaking to witness. The social worker files from before her mother's arrest painted the picture of a vibrant, chatty toddler who sang constantly, asked endless questions, and could charm anyone with her infectious giggle. Carmen Rodriguez, despite her growing addiction and criminal involvement, had doted on her daughter. The home videos recovered from their house showed Emma dancing to music, building elaborate block towers, and narrating elaborate stories to her stuffed animals in the mixed English-Spanish that comes naturally to bilingual toddlers. But that Emma was gone, replaced by this silent shadow who flinched at sudden movements and whose eyes held secrets too heavy for a 3-year-old to carry. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the state's child psychologist, had spent countless hours trying to reach Emma through every therapeutic technique known to modern psychology. Play therapy sessions filled with dolls and toy houses yielded nothing. But Emma stacking blocks in perfect, compulsive rows. Art therapy produced only black scribbles, violent slashes of crayon across paper that spoke of inner turmoil no child should experience. Music therapy, which had shown promise with other traumatized children, left Emma catatonic. Especially when instruments were involved, the sound seemed to transport her back to that night, when her world collapsed in a symphony of shouting voices and slamming doors. The most disturbing aspect of Emma's condition was her night terrors. Linda had installed a baby monitor in Emma's room after the first week. When the child's silent screaming had sent her rushing upstairs in panic, Emma would bolt upright in bed, her mouth open in a soundless scream, her small body rigid with terror, tears streaming down her face. But even in the grip of these nightmares, no sound emerged. It was as if her voice had been locked away so completely that even terror couldn't break through the silence. Linda watched as Emma's tiny hands gripped the worn teddy bear she carried everywhere, a raggedy brown bear named Chocolate that had belonged to her since birth. The bear was a casualty of that night too, marked with evidence tape and forensic powder before being returned weeks later. Emma had held it close when she first saw it again, and Linda had noticed something that made her heart break. Emma had whispered something to the bear, so quietly that no one else could hear. It was the closest thing to speech anyone had witnessed since their arrest. The medical evaluations painted a clinical picture of Emma's trauma, but they couldn't capture the daily reality of caring for a child whose spirit seemed to have retreated so far inside herself that it might never return. Emma ate mechanically when fed, slept fitfully when exhausted, and submitted to baths and diaper changes with the passive compliance of someone who had learned that resistance was futile. She showed no interest in toys, no curiosity about her surroundings, and no attachment to the rotating cast of social workers, therapists, and medical professionals who paraded through her life. The only time Emma showed any emotional response was during supervised visits with her father. Marcus would sit across from her in the sterile visiting room at the Department of Family Services, his military bearing crumbling as he tried desperately to connect with his daughter. He would bring books, crayons, small toys, anything that might spark recognition or joy. Emma would look at him with those haunting dark eyes, and sometimes Linda swore she could see a flicker of something, memory, perhaps, or longing, but it would disappear as quickly as it came. Mija, Marcus would whisper in Spanish, using the pet name he'd called her since birth. Papa's here. Papa loves you. But Emma would only stare, her small fingers working the fur of her teddy bear like a rosary of comfort. The psychological reports were filled with terms that sounded like a foreign language to Linda. Selective mutism secondary to acute trauma, dissociative episodes consistent with PTSD, attachment disruption with regression to preverbal states. But Linda didn't need medical terminology to understand what she was witnessing. Emma wasn't just silent, she was drowning in memories, too terrible for her developing mind to process. As Detective Chen continued her testimony about the drug bust, Linda noticed something she hadn't seen in months. Emma was paying attention to something other than her teddy bear. The child's head was slightly raised, her eyes focused on the German shepherd sitting beside the witness stand. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But Linda had spent enough sleepless nights watching Emma to recognize when something had captured her interest. Emma's breathing had changed too, becoming deeper and more regular. Her deft grip on Chocolate had loosened slightly, and her small body seemed less rigid in the chair. For the first time since Linda had known her, Emma looked aware, not just present, but actively engaged with her surroundings. Linda felt a flutter of something she had almost given up on, hope. She had no idea what was happening, but something about that dog had penetrated Emma's carefully constructed walls of silence. As she watched Emma's face, Linda saw the faintest flicker of recognition cross the child's features, not fear, not the blank stare that had become her default expression, but something that looked almost like relief. Whatever was happening, Linda knew she was witnessing something significant. After 8 months of devastating silence, something had finally reached Emma Rodriguez. The question was, what would she do about it? The transformation began so subtly that at first, only Linda Thompson noticed. Emma's small body, which had been rigid with tension for the past hour, began to relax in her chair. Her breathing, usually shallow and quick, the breathing of someone perpetually on the edge of flight, deepened into something that resembled calm. For 8 months, Linda had watched Emma exist in a state of hypervigilance, always ready for the next catastrophe, never truly at rest. But now, as Detective Chen detailed the methodical search of the Rodriguez home, something fundamental was shifting in the traumatized child. Emma's dark eyes, which typically stared at nothing with the vacant expression that had become her default, were now focused with laser intensity on Rex. The German Shepherd sat in perfect professional posture beside the witness stand, but even from across the courtroom, Linda could see that the dog was equally aware of Emma. His ears, trained to detect the slightest sounds during drug operations, were tilted slightly in her direction. His tail, which should have been motionless during official proceedings, was beginning to twitch with what could only be described as anticipation. The search commenced at 11:47 p.m., Detective Chen was saying, her voice steady and professional. As she recounted the events of that October night, Rex alerted to the master bedroom closet first, where we discovered the 0.3 kilograms of cocaine hidden in a false bottom of a cedar chest. But Emma wasn't listening to the testimony. She was lost in a memory, and for the first time in months, it was in a memory that filled her with terror. Something about Rex's presence, his scent, his very being, was unlocking chambers in her mind that had been sealed shut by trauma. Her small fingers, which had been clutching Chocolate the teddy bear in a death grip, began to loosen. The bear, stained with evidence powder and bearing the invisible scars of that night just as Emma did, slipped slightly from her grasp. Judge Hernandez, who had been taking notes on Detective Chen's testimony, glanced up and noticed the subtle disturbance in the gallery. Years of courtroom experience had taught her to be aware of everything happening in her domain, from the shuffle of attorneys' papers to the shift in public mood. What she saw made her pause mid-note. Emma Rodriguez, the silent child who had become the tragic center of this custody battle, was moving. It started with Emma's legs, which had been dangling motionless from the chair. They began to swing slightly, the way a normal 3-year-old's legs might swing when they were thinking or excited. Then her head turned more fully toward Rex, and Judge Hernandez felt her breath catch for the first time since she had presided over this case. Emma looked truly present, not lost in the void of trauma, but here, in this moment, experiencing something real. Marcus Rodriguez, who had been listening to the painful recitation of evidence that had destroyed his family, suddenly noticed the stirring in the gallery. His daughter, his silent, broken daughter, was sitting up straighter. The change was so dramatic that he nudged his attorney, Sarah Beth Williams, who looked back and felt her pen freeze in her hand. In all the months of hearings, depositions, and court appearances, Emma had never shown this level of awareness. Your Honor, Detective Chen continued. Consulting her notes, Rex then alerted to the child's bedroom, where we discovered, she paused, her professional composure faltering slightly, where we discovered additional contraband hidden behind a loose baseboard. But as Chen spoke about Emma's bedroom, the place where a little girl's dreams had been invaded by her mother's criminal activities, Emma rose from her chair. The movement was so unexpected, so unprecedented, that it sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Court Security Officer David Martinez, a 20-year veteran who had seen every possible disruption, moved instinctively toward the gallery. His hand was halfway to his radio when Judge Hernandez raised her own hand in a gesture that stopped him mid-stride. Emma stood on unsteady legs, her small body swaying slightly as if she were awakening from a very long sleep. Chocolate the teddy bear fell from her lap to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent courtroom. Linda Thompson reached out instinctively to steady her. was something in Emma's demeanor, a sense of purpose. That hadn't been there moments before made her pull back. "Emma," Linda whispered, so quietly that only those in the immediate vicinity could hear. But Emma didn't respond to her name. She was focused entirely on Rex, and the German Shepherd was focused entirely on her. Rex had stopped being a professional police dog. His ears were fully erect now, his tail wagging with increasing enthusiasm. Detective Chen noticed the change in her partner and felt a chill run down her spine. In 3 years of partnership, through dangerous raids and high-stress situations, she had never seen Rex break his professional composure in a courtroom. But he was breaking it now, his entire attention focused on the small figure moving toward him. Emma took her first step down the aisle, her tiny sneakers making a sound that seemed impossibly loud. In the hushed courtroom, then another step, and another. She moved like someone walking through a dream, guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Her path was unsteady, but determined, each step carrying her closer to something she couldn't articulate, but desperately needed. Prosecutor Jean M. Mills, who had been building toward her climactic presentation of evidence, found herself speechless. Defense attorney Sarah Beth Williams clutched Marcus's arm as they both watched his daughter take her first independent action in 8 months. Court reporter Maria Santos realized she had stopped typing and couldn't remember when. Emma was halfway down the aisle now, and Rex was no longer sitting. The German Shepherd had risen to his feet, his powerful body quivering with an emotion that transcended his training. His whine soft and longing carried across the courtroom like a prayer. Detective Chen felt tears sting her eyes as she finally understood what she was witnessing. "Easy, Rex," she whispered, but there was no authority in her voice. This moment belonged to forces larger than police protocol or courtroom procedure. Emma stopped 3 feet from the witness stand, just outside the formal boundary that separated the gallery from the court's business. She stood there, a tiny figure in a pink dress with butterfly clips in her hair, staring up at Rex with an expression that was transforming by the second. The blank, traumatized mask that had defined her for 8 months was cracking, revealing glimpses of the child she had been before that terrible night. Judge Hernandez found herself holding her breath. In 23 years on the bench, she had never witnessed anything like this. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its collective breath, waiting for something none of them could have predicted. The only sounds were the soft whir of the air conditioning system, and Rex's increasingly urgent whines. Emma lifted her small hand toward Rex, and the German Shepherd's tail began to wag so hard his entire body moved with emotion. Detective Chen realized she was crying, not just tearing up, but crying openly in the middle of official testimony. Whatever was about to happen, she knew it would change everything they thought they understood about that night 8 months ago. The silence stretched on, heavy with possibility and hope and the weight of a little girl's journey back from the depths of trauma. Emma's hand remained extended toward Rex, and in that gesture, everyone in courtroom 3B sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary, something that would redefine not just this case, but their understanding of healing, memory, and the mysterious connections that can exist between a traumatized child and the unexpected guardian who had protected her in her darkest hour. Time seemed to crystallize in courtroom 3B as Emma's small hand hung suspended in the air. Between her and Rex, the German Shepherd's entire body language had transformed from professional police dog to something far more primal and emotional. His dark eyes, trained to detect the faintest chemical traces of hidden narcotics, were now locked onto Emma with an intensity that transcended his years of conditioning. Detective Sarah Chen watched in amazement as her partner, the same dog, who could maintain perfect composure during explosive raids and high-stakes arrests, began to tremble. With what could only be described as overwhelming joy, Rex released a sound that Chen had never heard from him before, a low, keening whine that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. It wasn't the alert signal he used when detecting drugs, nor the warning growl he employed when confronting dangerous suspects. This was something entirely different, a sound of recognition, of longing, of a grief so profound that it had been eating at him for 8 months. Without anyone understanding why, Emma's hand moved closer, and Rex's response was immediate and heartbreaking. He pressed forward against Detective Chen's restraining grip, his powerful body straining toward the little girl with a desperation that was almost human in its intensity. His tail wagged so violently that his entire rear end moved with emotion, and the professional mask that had defined his courtroom demeanor completely dissolved. "Rex, stay," Chen commanded softly, but there was no conviction in her voice. Her training told her to maintain control, but her instincts as both a police officer and a human being told her that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that was bigger than protocol, bigger than procedure, bigger than anything she had ever witnessed in her 12 years of law enforcement. Judge Hernandez found herself gripping her gavel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. In 23 years on the bench, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read a courtroom's emotional temperature, to sense when something significant was about to happen. But this was beyond her experience, beyond her training, beyond anything she could have imagined when she first reviewed the Rodriguez case file. Emma took another half step forward, and suddenly Rex's restraint broke entirely. He lunged forward, not with the controlled aggression of a police dog apprehending a suspect, but with the boundless enthusiasm of a dog greeting his beloved family after a long separation. Detective Chen, caught off guard by her partner's unprecedented behavior, felt the leash slip from her fingers. Rex bounded the remaining distance to Emma into powerful strides, but as he reached her, his demeanor shifted once again. The same dog who had just displayed overwhelming excitement suddenly became gentle, careful, almost reverent. He dropped to his belly in front of Emma, making himself smaller, less intimidating. His massive head tilted up toward her with an expression that was unmistakably tender. Emma's reaction was the most shocking of all. The child, who had flinched at sudden movements for 8 months, who had retreated into catatonic silence whenever confronted with anything unexpected, showed no fear whatsoever. Instead, she sank to her knees in front of Rex and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp that was immediately followed by the most profound silence anyone present had ever experienced. Even the air conditioning system seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Emma's embrace of Rex wasn't the tentative touch of a child meeting a strange dog. It was the desperate reunion of two souls who had been separated. Against their will, Rex's response was equally extraordinary. The dog, who had been trained to maintain professional distance, who had been conditioned to view every situation through the lens of law enforcement, melted into Emma's embrace like he was coming home. He pressed his massive head against her small shoulder and released a series of soft whimpers that sounded almost like sobs. Detective Chen felt her professional composure crumble entirely. Tears streamed down her face as fragmented memories from that October night suddenly arranged themselves into a coherent picture. She remembered Rex's strange behavior after the search was complete. How he had refused to leave the house even after all evidence had been collected and cataloged. She remembered finding him sitting outside a bedroom door, whining softly in the darkness. She remembered having to physically coax him away from the house, and how he had turned back multiple times as they walked to their patrol car. That bedroom had been Emma's. Marcus Rodriguez rose from his chair, his own eyes streaming with tears as he watched his daughter display more emotion in 30 seconds than she had shown in 8 months. The military bearing that had sustained him through 3 combat deployments, through his ex-wife's arrest, through months of legal battles, finally cracked. He pressed his hands to his mouth to muffle a sob as he realized he was witnessing his daughter's first steps back from the abyss of trauma. Linda Thompson, who had spent countless sleepless nights worrying about Emma's future, felt a surge of hope so powerful it was almost painful. She had fostered 147 children, had seen recoveries that bordered on miraculous, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Emma wasn't just showing recognition, she was showing love, trust, and a connection that seemed to transcend the normal boundaries between human and animal. The embrace continued, and Rex began to exhibit behaviors that Detective Chen had never seen from him. He was grooming Emma gently, his tongue carefully cleaning her tear-streaked face with the delicate attention of a mother caring for her young. His massive paws, trained to scratch at doors and alert to hidden contraband, were now gently patting Emma's back in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. But it was Emma's transformation that was most miraculous. The rigid, traumatized child who had sat like a statue for months was now fluid, animated, alive. Her small hands moved through Rex's fur with the familiarity of long practice, finding spots behind his ears that made him lean into her touch with obvious pleasure. She was humming not words, not yet, but a soft, melodic sound that was the first intentional noise she had made since that terrible October night. Judge Hernandez realized she was witnessing something that would define not just this case, but her entire career. Whatever the legal implications, whatever the procedural irregularities, She was watching a traumatized child take her first steps toward healing. The connection between Emma and Rex wasn't just emotional, it was therapeutic, restorative, and somehow essential to both of them. Prosecutor Jana Mills, who had built her entire case around Emma's inability to function normally, found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about trauma recovery. Defense attorney Sarah Beth Williams was frantically taking notes, recognizing that this moment had fundamentally altered the trajectory of their case. But perhaps most importantly, Emma Rodriguez, the silent, broken child who had become a tragic symbol of the collateral damage caused by the drug war, was beginning to heal in Rex's presence. Surrounded by his warmth and protection, she was remembering who she had been before that night changed everything. The connection nobody saw coming was revealing itself to be the key to everything, not just to Emma's recovery, but to understanding what had really happened during those crucial hours, when her world fell apart and a police dog became her unlikely guardian angel. The silence in Courtroom 3B was so complete that it seemed to have weight, pressing down on everyone present like a physical force. Emma remained kneeling on the polished marble floor, her small arms wrapped around Rex's massive neck, while the German Shepherd continued his gentle ministration, soft whimpers, careful grooming, and the kind of protective positioning that spoke to instincts deeper than training. The entire courtroom had become suspended in this moment, as if time itself had paused to witness something extraordinary. Judge Patricia Hernandez found herself leaning forward in her chair, her gavel forgotten in her lap. Every person in the courtroom was straining to catch whatever might come next, sensing that they stood on the precipice of something that would change everything. The court reporter, Maria Santos, sat with her fingers poised over her keyboard, ready to record what might be the most significant testimony of her 20-year career, even though it might come from the smallest witness who had ever appeared. In her courtroom, Emma's breathing had synchronized with Rex's, their chests rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke to a connection forged in trauma and sealed in trust. Her small fingers worked through his thick fur with the practiced familiarity of someone who had done this before, many times, in circumstances none of them could yet fully understand. Rex's dark eyes were fixed on Emma's face with an intensity that transcended his professional training, watching her with the devoted attention of a guardian who had never stopped mourning the loss of his charge. Detective Sarah Chen felt her own breathing become shallow as she watched her partner exhibit behavior she had never seen before. Rex was making soft sounds deep in his throat, not whines or whimpers, but something that sounded almost like he was trying to communicate in a language only Emma could understand. His tail moved in slow, gentle sweeps across the marble floor, and his massive body remained perfectly still except for the careful movements of his head. As he continued to nuzzle Emma's face and neck, Linda Thompson gripped the edge of her seat so tightly her knuckles went white. In 15 years of fostering traumatized children, she had learned to recognize the moments when breakthrough was possible, those fragile instances when a child's carefully constructed walls of protection might crack just enough to let healing begin. But this was beyond anything she had ever witnessed. Emma wasn't just connecting with an animal. She was reconnecting with a part of herself that everyone had feared was lost forever. Marcus Rodriguez stood frozen beside his attorney's table, afraid that any movement might shatter the spell that had transformed his silent daughter into this responsive, present child. Tears streamed down his face as he watched Emma display more genuine emotion in these few minutes than she had shown during all their supervised visits combined. This wasn't the hollow, traumatized shell that had haunted his nightmares for 8 months. This was his daughter, his Mija, emerging from whatever dark place she had retreated to on that terrible October night. The courtroom's collective breath caught as Emma's lips began to move. She wasn't making sound yet, but her mouth was forming shapes, practicing words that hadn't crossed her lips into 145 days. Rex seemed to sense what was coming. His ears perked forward with the keen attention he usually reserved for detecting the faintest traces of narcotics. Except now he was listening for something infinitely more precious than evidence. Emma's head lifted slightly from Rex's neck, and she looked directly into his eyes. For the first time since her mother's arrest, her gaze was clear, focused, and fully present. The fog of trauma that had clouded her dark eyes was lifting, revealing the intelligent, loving child who had been trapped inside her own mind for so long. Her lips moved again, and this time a whisper of sound emerged so soft that only Rex could hear it at first. The German Shepherd's entire body went rigid with attention. his tail stopping mid-sweep as he focused every fiber of his being on what Emma was trying to say. "Come on, sweetheart," Linda whispered silently, not daring to speak aloud, but willing Emma forward with every ounce of hope she possessed. Around the courtroom, other silent prayers were being offered from Marcus, from Judge Hernandez, from Detective Chen, from everyone who had invested their hearts in this broken child's recovery. Emma took a shaky breath, her small chest rising and falling with the effort of what she was about to attempt. Her hands moved to cup Rex's massive head between her palms, holding him steady as she looked into his eyes with an expression of pure love and recognition. The connection between them was so palpable that everyone in the courtroom could feel it, a bond forged in darkness, but strong enough to pull a child back from the edge of despair. And then, in the cathedral silence of Courtroom 3B, Emma Rodriguez spoke. "Good boy." The words emerged clearly, distinctly, carrying across the hushed courtroom like a thunderclap. They were the first words Emma had spoken in 245 days, and they hit every person present with the force of a revelation. The simple phrase, universal words of praise and affection, contained multitudes, recognition, gratitude, love, and the first tentative steps of a journey back to the world of the living. Marcus Rodriguez collapsed into his chair, his body racked with sobs that came from a place deeper than grief, deeper than relief. These weren't just his daughter's first words in 8 months. They were proof that she was still in there, still capable of love, still able to connect with the world around her. The military discipline that had carried him through combat zones and custody battles finally crumbled entirely as he watched his little girl take her first steps back to him. Judge Hernandez felt tears streaming down her own face as she witnessed something she had never seen into decades on the bench, the exact moment when healing began. Emma's words weren't just communication, they were testimony to the power of connection, to the mysterious ways that love could manifest even in the darkest circumstances, and to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Detective Chen understood instantly that everything she thought she knew about that October night was wrong, or at least incomplete. Rex hadn't just found drugs in the Rodriguez house. He had found Emma, and somehow, in ways that Chen was only beginning to comprehend, he had become her protector, her comfort, her lifeline during the most traumatic experience of her young life. Rex's response to Emma's words was immediate and overwhelming. He pressed closer to her, his tail wagging with such force that his entire body moved with emotion. His whimpers intensified, and he began to shower Emma's face with gentle kisses, as if he had been waiting 8 months to hear those exact words from this exact child. "Good boy," Emma repeated, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. "Good boy, Rex." The fact that she knew his name sent another shock wave through the courtroom. This wasn't a random connection between a traumatized child and a therapy animal. This was a reunion between two souls who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control, who had found each other again in the most unlikely of places. The silence that followed Emma's words was different from the silence that had preceded them. It was charged with possibility, with hope, with the sudden understanding that everything they thought they knew about this case was about to change. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice again, and in doing so, she was about to reveal a truth that would transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who had been touched by her story. Detective Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she knelt beside Emma and Rex, her professional composure completely shattered by what she was witnessing. The connection between her K-9 partner and this traumatized child wasn't just remarkable, it was impossible according to everything she had been taught about police procedure and evidence collection. Yet as Emma continued to whisper endearments to Rex, stroking his fur with the familiarity of long practice, Chen felt the fragments of that October night rearranging themselves into a truth that would haunt her for the rest of her career. "I need to amend my testimony," Chen said, her voice breaking as she looked up at Judge Hernandez. The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the profound silence of the courtroom, everyone heard them clearly. "There's something about that night, something I left out of my official report because I didn't understand it at the time." Judge Hernandez, still gripping her gavel with white knuckles, nodded slowly. 23 years on the bench had taught her to recognize moments when truth was about to surface, truth that could change everything. "Please continue." "Detective Chen, the court is listening." Chen's voice strengthened as she began to piece together the story that had been hidden in plain sight for 8 months. "The raid began at 11:47 p.m. We entered through the front door with a full tactical team, while Rex and I proceeded with the Narcotics search. The house was chaotic. Carmen Rodriguez was screaming at the officers, demanding to call her lawyer. Her associates were being arrested in various rooms throughout the house. But Rex. She paused, looking down at her partner, who was still pressed against Emma's small form. Rex completed his drug alerts with his usual efficiency, but then something changed. Marcus Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, every word from Detective Chen feeling like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was trying to solve. His daughter, his precious Mija, had been alone in that house of horrors, while he was thousands of miles away, serving his country. The guilt had been eating at him for months, but now he sensed he was about to learn something that would either destroy him completely or give him the first real hope he'd felt since returning from deployment. Rex alerted to contraband in the master bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, all the locations that made it into my official report. Chen continued, her eyes never leaving Emma as the child continued to comfort the German shepherd. But after we'd collected all the evidence, Rex refused to leave. He kept returning to one specific bedroom door, whining in a way I'd never heard before. I thought maybe he was detecting residual scent traces, so I let him investigate. Linda Thompson felt her heart beginning to race. She had read every police report, every social worker's assessment, every psychological evaluation related to Emma's case. But none of them had mentioned this detail. None of them had described Rex's behavior that night. Beyond his role in drug detection, the bedroom was small, clearly belonging to a child, Chen said, her voice gaining strength as she recounted details that had been buried in her memory for months. There were toys scattered on the floor, children's books on a shelf, and she looked directly at Emma, who was now sitting up and listening intently while keeping one small hand on Rex's head. There was a closet door, partially open. The courtroom held its collective breath as Chen described approaching that closet. Following Rex, who seemed to know exactly where he was going, Rex went straight to the closet and sat down outside it, whining. Not his alert signal. This was different. This was protective. When I opened the door wider, Chen's voice broke completely. Emma was there. She was hiding behind hanging clothes, clutching a teddy bear. As she was terrified, Judge Hernandez felt the pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. The official reports had stated that Emma was found by social workers after the arrests were complete, but they had never specified exactly where she was found or who had located her first. She was so small, Chen whispered, tears streaming down her face now. Maybe 3 years old, in little pink pajamas with butterflies on them. She was shaking, and when I reached toward her, she shrank back further into the closet. But Rex Detective Chen looked at her partner with newfound understanding. Rex crawled into that closet with her. The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow. This wasn't a story about a police dog doing his job. This was a story about a guardian angel, in the form of a German shepherd who had found a terrified child and decided to protect her. For 3 hours, Chen continued, her voice gaining momentum as the suppressed memories flooded back, while we processed the scene, collected evidence, and arrested the suspects. Rex stayed with Emma in that closet. He wouldn't leave her side. Every time I called him, he would look at me and then back at her, as if he was asking permission to go. But Emma had her arms around his neck, and she was whispering to him. Emma's voice, clear and strong now, cut through Detective Chen's testimony. He stayed with me. He kept me safe. The simple statement from the 3-year-old sent shockwaves through everyone present. These weren't just Emma's first words in 8 months. They were testimony to an extraordinary act of compassion that had occurred in the middle of one of Jefferson County's largest drug busts. She was talking to him that night, Marcus asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Emma turned toward her father, and for the first time since his return from Afghanistan, she looked directly at him with clear, present eyes. Rex told me Papa was coming home. He said I had to be brave until Papa got back. The courtroom erupted in stunned silence. Emma's words suggested something that defied rational explanation and communication between child and dog that had sustained her through the most traumatic experience of her young life. Detective Chen nodded slowly, understanding now why Rex had been different ever since that night. When social services arrived to take Emma into protective custody, Rex wouldn't let them approach at first. He positioned himself between Emma and the social workers until I convinced him it was okay. And when they took her away, Chen's voice broke again. Rex howled. In 5 years of partnership, I had never heard him make a sound like that. It was heartbroken. Judge Hernandez felt tears streaming down her own face as the truth became clear. Rex hadn't just found evidence that night. He had found Emma Rodriguez, and in that closet, surrounded by the chaos of her mother's arrest, he had become her protector, her comfort, and quite possibly the reason she had survived the trauma at all. That's why he's been different, Chen realized aloud. For 8 months, Rex has been mourning. He lost Emma that night just as much as she lost everything else. He's been carrying this grief, this love for a child he couldn't protect from what came after. Emma's small voice carried across the courtroom one more time, clear and strong and full of the wisdom that comes only from having been saved by unexpected grace. He promised he would find me again. Rex always keeps his promises. The truth was finally revealed. Rex hadn't just been a police dog doing his job that October night. He had been a guardian angel who had found a terrified child and had loved her, protected her, and given her the strength to survive until this moment when they could be reunited. The drug bust that had destroyed Emma's family had also forged an unbreakable bond between a traumatized child and a dog who had chosen to love her when she needed it most. 6 months after that extraordinary day in Courtroom 3B, the morning sun painted golden streaks across Jefferson County Memorial Park as Emma Rodriguez ran through the grass with the unbridled joy that only a healthy 4-year-old could possess. Her laughter echoed across the playground, a sound so pure and musical that other parents stopped their conversations to smile at the obvious. Happiness radiating from the small girl in the bright yellow sundress. But it wasn't just Emma's laughter that drew their attention, it was her constant companion, a magnificent German shepherd who bounded beside her with equal enthusiasm. His professional police training temporarily forgotten in favor of the simple joy of play. Maz, rapido, Rex, faster. Emma called out in the bilingual chatter that had returned to her speech, her small legs pumping as she raced toward the swing set. Rex easily kept pace with her, his powerful stride adjusted to match her shorter steps, his dark eyes never leaving her form. The transformation in both of them since that pivotal courtroom moment was nothing short of miraculous. Judge Patricia Hernandez had made legal history that day, becoming the first judge in Texas to incorporate animal-assisted therapy into a custody ruling. Her decision had been both controversial and groundbreaking, requiring months of legal research, consultations with child psychologists, and the creation of entirely new protocols for therapeutic intervention. But watching Emma now vibrant, vocal, and clearly thriving, Hernandez knew she had made the right choice, even if it had meant rewriting the rule book. The custody ruling had been unanimous once Emma found her voice. Marcus Rodriguez had been granted full custody of his daughter, with the stipulation that Emma's recovery program would include supervised visits with Rex 3 times per week. What had started as a legal requirement had evolved into something far more significant. Jefferson County's first K-9-assisted child trauma therapy program, with Rex and Detective Chen pioneering protocols that would eventually help hundreds of other children. Marcus sat on a park bench 30 feet away, his eyes never leaving his daughter as she played. The transformation in their relationship had been as dramatic as Emma's recovery itself. The withdrawn, silent child who had barely acknowledged his presence during those painful supervised visits had blossomed into a chattering, affectionate daughter who would run to greet him each evening with stories of her day. Their bedtime routine now included Emma reading to Rex, a daily ritual that served as both therapy and bonding time for all 3 of them. "Papa, watch this," Emma called out, climbing onto the monkey bars with the fearless confidence that had replaced her months of hypervigilance. Rex positioned himself directly beneath her, ready to catch her if she fell at protective behavior. That had become second nature to him. Detective Chen approached the bench where Marcus sat, carrying the cups of coffee from the park's concession stand. Her own transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable. What had started as reluctant compliance with court orders had evolved into passionate advocacy for children's rights and trauma recovery. She had completed certification in animal-assisted therapy, worked with child psychologists to develop new protocols, and had become something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles for her innovative approach to community policing. "How's she doing in preschool?" Chen asked, settling beside Marcus as they both watched Emma demonstrate her climbing skills to Rex, who responded with encouraging barks and tail wags. "Better than anyone dared hope," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion that still caught him off guard after all these months. Her teacher says she's one of the most empathetic children in the class yesterday. She comforted another little girl who was crying by telling her that sometimes scary things happen, but there are always good people and good dogs who will help you feel safe again. The ripple effects of Emma's recovery had extended far beyond her immediate family. Linda Thompson, her former foster mother, had become a certified trauma specialist and now worked exclusively with children who had been affected by drug-related crimes. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison had published papers on the effectiveness of interspecies therapy in treating childhood PTSD, citing Emma's case as groundbreaking. Even prosecutor Jeanette Mills had redirected her career focus toward advocacy for children caught in the crossfire of their parents' criminal activities. "Rex, come," Emma called from the top of the slide, and the German shepherd immediately abandoned his patrol position to sit at the bottom, ready to catch her. This simple interaction, a child calling a dog and being instantly obeyed, represented months of careful work to help Rex navigate his dual roles as working police dog and therapeutic companion. The breakthrough had required extensive retraining. For Rex as well, police dogs were conditioned to maintain professional distance, to follow only their handlers' commands, and to view civilians primarily as potential threats or sources of evidence. But Emma's case had revealed Rex's capacity for something beyond professional duty, a deep, emotional intelligence that allowed him to serve both law enforcement and healing with equal dedication. Chen's radio crackled softly on her belt, reminding them both that this peaceful morning was temporary. In a few hours, Rex would return to his duties as Jefferson County's premier narcotics detection dog, his nose leading officers to hidden drugs, and his testimony helping prosecutors secure convictions. But the department had learned to work around his therapy schedule, recognizing that Rex's work with Emma and other traumatized children was as valuable as his traditional police work. "Time to go, Mija," Marcus called softly as Emma finished her slide adventure and ran to Rex for congratulations. The transition from playtime to goodbye was always the hardest part of these visits, but Emma had learned to handle even difficult emotions with remarkable resilience. Emma threw her arms around Rex's neck in their ritual farewell embrace, whispering something in his ear that made his tail wag furiously. "I told him about the butterfly I saw in our garden yesterday," she explained to the adults. "Rex likes butterflies almost as much as I do." As they prepared to leave the park, Emma skipped beside her father while Rex walked in perfect heel position next to Detective Chen, to different modes of the same extraordinary dog, who had somehow managed to be exactly what everyone needed him to be. Emma paused at the park entrance and turned back to wave at the playground where she had spent so many happy hours reclaiming her childhood. "Papa," she said, slipping her small hand into Marcus's larger one, "do you think there are other little kids who need a Rex?" Marcus squeezed her hand gently, marveling at his daughter's capacity for empathy despite everything she had endured. "I think there might be, Mija. What do you think we should do about that?" Emma considered this with the serious expression that sometimes crossed her face when she was processing big thoughts. "I think Rex and Miss Chen should teach other police dogs how to be helpers for scared kids, and maybe I could help too when I'm bigger." Detective Chen felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that Emma's trauma had transformed into something else entirely, a calling to help other children who might find themselves lost in darkness, waiting for their own guardian angel to find them. The Emma Rodriguez case had become legend in Jefferson County, not just for its legal precedents, but for its testament to the power of unexpected connections, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary capacity for healing that emerges when love appears in its most unlikely forms. A traumatized child and a police dog had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had created something beautiful from the wreckage: hope, healing, and a new understanding of what it means to protect and serve the most vulnerable members of society. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma's laughter still echoing across the park, it was clear that while their story had begun with tragedy, it would be remembered for the miracle that followed the moment when, to words spoken by a brave little girl, changed not just her own life, but an entire community's approach to healing trauma and building bridges between law enforcement and the families they serve.